Hey guys, just a quick note before we start the show here. We're dealing with a creator who isn't technically American. He now lives in America, but he was born in Havana, Cuba, and he does not have an English-sounding name. And me being a big, stupid Midwesterner, I don't know that much Spanish. So if I butcher this pronunciation, it's not to offend. It's just, I'm not that good at Spanish. So apologies if I offend anyone. I'm not trying to. Okay? Let's start the show. Okay, so there's not really a lot of background information available about this series. The only thing I can really tell you is that the creator, Michelle Pfeiffer, was inspired by the DC comic series The Suicide Squad. The funny thing is, I'm not entirely sure as to which one.
The original Suicide Squad were a team in World War II consisting of soldiers who were considered expendable due to not really being soldiers but rather scientists and medics, with the only permanent member being the leader, Rick Flag Sr. But I'm sure most of you are more familiar with the modern incarnation of the Suicide Squad, who we first covered way back in episode 49 in the DC crossover story, Legends. That team, consisting of supervillains forced to work for a government organization called Task Force X, played out more like a superpowered version of the movie The Dirty Dozen.
Now, Pfeiffer had explored this premise before in a mini-comic called Death Zone before tweaking the premise and combining it with another series he created called Zagos to create COPRA, the series we're looking at today. Now again, there are times I get a little confused reading this book. Yes, there are some elements of the Suicide Squad in this, but there's also times this reads more like, say, the A-Team, which is an entirely different premise than the Suicide Squad. I'll get more into that a little bit later, but for now, we're going to take a look at the ongoing series of COPRA, which was initially published by Bergen Street Press before moving to Image. This is COPRA, Round 1.
On the outskirts of a small town, a group of masked individuals picks up a bizarre object that has been wreaking a lot of havoc. It's a skull with a large lightning bolt-shaped object embedded in it. This team is COPRA, and the favor is being done for team leader Manhead's cousin, who is the town mayor.
Joining Manhead are Gracie, an ex-supermodel turned hand-to-hand combat specialist, Guthie, a firearms expert, and Weir, a juvenile hacktivist with power armor. There are a few other team members, but trust me, their relevance isn't going to be too important to this book for much longer.
As the group's transport heads out of the town, a giant being suddenly rises up out of the road and impales the driver with a rebar. The vehicle is soon surrounded and several COPRA members are killed. Manhead immediately recognizes this invader's leader as his ex-teammate Vitas. Unfortunately, Manhead soon is overwhelmed as Vitas grabs the skull and then immediately sends some type of energy blast back towards the town, destroying it completely. The skull then dissolves, with the lightning bolt being left behind as Vitas grabs it and teleports away with his team. As for the surviving COPRA members, they get picked up by Whir and flown to safety. Back at team headquarters, the head of COPRA, Sonia, reads the group the riot act, as the only respite is that Manhead still has a piece of the lightning bolt somehow.
In a nutshell, the mission was off the books, with Manhead receiving a call from his cousin, the mayor of the town, who explained that an old farmer had blown up his shed performing some type of arcane ritual. And yes, that's the farmer's skull with the lightning bolt embedded in it.
Making things worse, the COPRA members are on the news being blamed for the destruction of the town and the deaths of 32,000 people, with it being believed that Sonia ordered the attack, meaning they now have massive bounties on their head. Weir wants to split up and go into hiding, but Sonia wants her good name cleared and sets out to have that chunk of the lightning bolt investigated with an old college friend Vincent and his wife Xenia. Meanwhile, Gracie sets out to track down their attackers. One of Vitas's underlings begins pointing the finger at the true mastermind being a crime boss that is just a giant brain in a jar named Dai.
No, you don't understand. I must have power. I must.
Back with Sonya and her crew, Vincent has Xenia transfer her consciousness into the lightning bolt, only for her to start losing control, saying that something's about to open before fainting just as a large portal appears in the room. It's then that some type of circuitry creature emerges from the portal and prepares to attack the group. Weir suits up and defends the others by eventually blasting this being through a skylight. Back at the house, Xenia's eyes begin glowing green. Elsewhere, in some type of other room, a large crystalline being named Gary begins tormenting some type of law enforcement officer named Rax.
I'm guessing he also didn't like Mr. Delicious?
Well, hello, Mr. D again. Our subject? Value Express combos at the Rax drive-thru. These tasty delights are priced in low, even dollar amounts, so there's no change. That's just grand, because Mr. Delicious just had some rather delicate surgery. If there's no change, he doesn't have to squirm so much to put it back in his pocket, now does he? He just grabs his combo and drives ever so slowly over the speed bump. Tickety-dee.
Rax begins to put up a very good fight, but eventually Gary just winds up throwing him into another opened portal. Back with Sonya and the others, she winds up attacking Xenia as she realizes that Vitas is possessing her body. It's left her no choice but to shoot Xenia through the wrist just as Manhead arrives. Weir returns with the monster as Vincent manages to open up another portal, only for Rax to come tumbling out. The group interrogates Rax while Manhead enlists the aid of former COPRA agent Lloyd, as well as several others.
According to Michelle Fife's website, this fourth issue was actually delayed by a blizzard. Look, I said there really wasn't that much background information on this book.
With no other choice for lodging, Sonya and the rest of COPRA elect to stay at Manhead's apartment, with the only objector being Manhead, as his roommates are not exactly the welcoming type. Rax began explaining things to Lloyd and a few others, including one named Sven, who Goth has a crush on, that this lightning bolt is part of a prototype helmet designed to enhance latent psychic abilities. The one huge drawback is that it will eventually just burn the brain out completely. This resulted in the helmet being tossed in what was thought to be a wasteland dimension. When the farmer opened the portal and attempted to retrieve the helmet, it exploded, thus embedding itself in his skull. Sonya then goes on to explain that Vitas already has psychic powers, so he might not have the ill effects that others would have, and if the helmet ever gets properly assembled, those powers might become immeasurable. This is all interrupted by the return of Manhead's roommates, who it turns out are all bounty hunters, and realize the massive price on each member of COPRA's heads. Of course, a massive fight then breaks out, with Manhead confronting his roommate leader Klaus, only to wind up getting stabbed in the abdomen for it. Eventually, though, COPRA does manage to kill all their would-be captors, just as Xenia is able to track down the helmet pieces and Vitas in Japan. Xenia is able to teleport the team to Tokyo, but isn't going to join in any fighting, as this has gotten to be way too much for her. COPRA sets out to track down Vitas by working their way up the chain of command, eventually finding themselves in a bar where the bartender soon attacks them and runs off. Manhead and Gracie manage to corner this bartender, only to realize it was all a distraction and that Vitas is actually back at the bar, where he's immediately killed another team member in Harkness. Vitas then grabs what he thinks to be the last piece of the lightning bolt and fully assembles the helmet. He begins to grow in power and size as well, as he begins shrugging off every attack from COPRA in an attempt to try to steal the helmet back. Even the return of Manhead and Gracie provides little help, as Manhead in particular begins taking a very savage beating. However, it turns out that Sonya actually managed to break off another piece of the lightning bolt, and produces it in order to use her psychic abilities and thus nullify Vitas. It works just long enough for Manhead to beat Vitas into a bloody pulp, and then finally rip the helmet out of Vitas' body. However, the wear and tear is just too much for Manhead, and he dies shortly thereafter. Sonya then has Xenia transport Manhead's corpse along with the helmet into the wasteland dimension.
And that concludes round one of COPRA. How was it? Well, I really do like the artwork in this. Okay, so it's not your typical, Marvel or DC type artwork here, though Fife would later work with Marvel on an Ultimates book. But yeah, I think this is very evocative of the artwork of Gabriel Ba, who worked on the Umbrella Academy, or another Image comic called Casanova. It's got that kind of pop arty, esoteric type nature to it that I do think really lends itself to the story. and I like a lot of the character banter, and I do think there's some very nice action set pieces in this. If I have a problem with it, it's just, again, I think the world building's just kind of clumsy. I'm still not entirely sure what world we're in. Like, obviously it's Earth, and they sort of imply that they're in the United States, but is it supposed to be some sort of dystopia, some sort of post-apocalyptic thing? Why does COPRA exist exactly? Why do we need it to exist? Like, it seems there's things happening, but they don't really explain it. And I also, again, kind of go into where this team is presented. There are times they act like the supervillains trying to redeem themselves, again, like the later DC super team, the Suicide Squad, or the story that really inspired the Suicide Squad, the Dirty Dozen. But other times it's more like an elite commando unit. Like, again, I think it's also very militaristic. Like, some of them act more like the World War II era Suicide Squad, or again, that elite commando unit, like, say, the A-Team, where, yeah, they were military, but they were good guys who got, cheated. If you want a comic example, another DC title, The Losers, also fell into that category. So, yeah, again, it's a little too confusing sometimes, and, because of that, I don't know if I could really recommend this. Like, I just wish there was a little bit of background information, that's all. Like, just an intro page or something that set up the world, and that would make it a tiny bit easier to understand. I think, other than that, like, most of the characterization is pretty good. It's just, again, I'm not understanding all the angles here, and it just makes it a tiny bit too confusing. Like I said, overall, it's not terrible, but I just can't give it any type of full recommendation. I am going to be giving COPRA Round 1 a C. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Hey guys, remember you can support my work at patreon.com/CP Time for Cat Productions, where you can even request a trade to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. Also, remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so that you can be notified for further videos.